Hi, hope you're all well and happy and warm. Today I'm going to talk about homelessness, a subject that's been again with me for a few days as I've got some experience in this department. And of course there are many perspectives to homelessness. But before I start, I'll firstly state that today is the 4th of July, which is Independence Day in the United States. I'm actually looking at Independence Day as being independent. And this does actually correlate with being without a home. There are other ways to perceive a situation that we've called homelessness. But before I go into the present situation that I'm in, I'll talk a little bit about my experience with homelessness. We all have experiences which may lead us to a point where we feel we are compelled in some way to leave where we're living. There are a myriad of situations that can arise. One can be an eviction because possibly a landlord has broken bylaws and you've had to leave. Some other people, they might be evicted because of noise. It could be a marriage breakup or a relationship breakup where you find yourself thrown out. It could be an issue with your family members where the conflict has happened and you've had to leave. And you find yourself in a situation where you actually have nowhere to go. And that's the feeling and experience of being homeless. There is no home there to go to. This situation can easily happen if you're a person who's moved around a lot and you haven't got sort of social connections in different cities. It can happen when you've got no money, you can't afford rent, and you may make a decision that you do not wish to move into a shelter or temporary accommodation. You might perceive more risk involved in that. In my case, I had homelessness for around 2 years, and I was actually over in Perth in Western Australia. The feeling in some respects can be both illuminating in the sense that you don't know what's going to happen next. It's not predictable. You're curious about where life is going to take you. And then on the other hand, you can feel some real concern about where can I go? Where am I going to stay? In my case, I went over to Perth, so I drove across Nullarbor from Melbourne, and literally, I think I was a couple of 100 kilometres out of Perth. One of my friends was able to give me a place to stay. She organised with friends of hers. Up to that point, though, I had a tent and I'd been camping. Fortunately, the weather was very warm over in Western Australia, so I could easily camp. I also have a car, which I can run. And fortunately for me, my car's in really good mechanical order, so I very seldom even need to service it. I'm very lucky. It's been a miracle, actually, my car. And it doesn't cost me that much in petrol to run. So it means I can move. I'm not stuck. Even, if you're on a very low income, public transport gets very expensive, and then trying to feed yourself. So that 2 years in Perth, I found myself moving around different places. Now, typically I'm socially acceptable, so people did actually open their homes to me. They also know I'm into peace and that I've dedicated my life to peace. And this has often put myself in a dubious situation in respect of finances. I'm not motivated by money. I've been motivated by my vision, which is to contribute towards a peaceful world. And I do that through developing education and writing blogs and poetry, lots of things. So my lifestyle, if you like, is different, and that's another reason why I experience that sense of homelessness. People were not necessarily willing to pay money for what I was doing, and that's not to say that what I was doing was not quality. It certainly was, and I certainly have had feedback from schools that it was. But you have to be very business orientated to get businesses up and running, and I'm not that. I could put a lot of energy into it, but when you're inspired in the area of peace, in my case, there is a different sort of flow to it than the structured economic life. I'm also an economist by training as well, and I understand. I have worked in companies and, developed planning. I've done marketing, so I do know these things. But because of my own life change, where I felt inspired to follow my heart, not my head, it's actually meant that I've tended to step out of that normal framework that everybody else is living in and test those boundaries as to whether I can survive, and to sort of maintain, if I can, my focus on serving society in my way through peace and clowning and writing, researching, using my own life as a practice. Inner peace is a very difficult discipline in the sense that you have to pretty much undo what you've been taught by society to work on peace in the world, because the actual peace that I'm interested in is more in alignment with nature. Now, nature is not going to university and communicating in ways that mirror an education. The educational system has come from the thinking mind, which has come from the desire to have more control over natural forces, because we've felt actually out of control. There are seeds of that within the psyche of humanity, which is why we like to structure and control things. The work of peace is the opposite. It's actually about losing control. It's about allowing life to unfold. It's not necessarily about planning, although a plan may arise. It's more about looking at yourself and making changes that are more in harmony with peace and happiness. Happiness is actually the gauge. If you're not happy, you're not in alignment with your own truth. It's not about suppressing yourself in order to fit in. It's about being who you are, and you may not fit in. And if you can be at peace with that, you're on your way to self-discovery. So homelessness, for me, has been a part of that journey, because one of the greatest fears we all hold is to be without a home, to not feel we've got a place to put our head, to feel vulnerable or alone or isolated or cold. I've definitely had the feeling when I've found myself in other cities where I've actually had nowhere to go and I've had no one to support me. And I do recall being in great despair on an occasion when I'd had a conflict with someone and I had to leave. And I found myself in my car crying. And I am spiritual, so I prayed, for help. I actually really needed help that day. And funnily enough, and this is the magic, someone popped into my mind who I'd met, and I ended up bringing this guy. I didn't know him well, but I was able to find a room. And he was a nice enough guy I could stay with for a few months. So a solution emerged from that despair. I've also had a situation when I was over in Western Australia where I actually didn't have anywhere else to go. I'd stayed with people, and I usually stay no more than 3 or 4 days, 4 days tops, because I don't like to overstay. I also contribute in some way or another. So I'm not that, using that person, or that person's not feeling used. I typically try and make it of benefit to the other. But there was a point where I actually had to leave, and I was realising that I'd have to camp for a few weeks because I really had nowhere to stay, and I didn't want to ask anyone either. And I just sort of sat with it. I thought, well, where do I go? Where shall I set up tent? And I ended up having an inspiration, and that idea was to get into my clown suit and go to a school and offer my clowning by donation. I think I did. If they wanted to donate, that would be great. That would give me food. And I did 20 classes on the subject of happiness, and it was wonderful. The kids were very, very happy, and yeah, I jumped around, but I told them I was a world peace clown and what I did. The kids were inspired by that, and I showed them all my props, you know, and it was just so enormously joyful for me to bring joy into the lives of these children. So it was 20 classrooms, roughly 20 to 30 kids in each classroom. It was great, and it was over a week. I think I did it over a week. And I ended up staying with a friend who was a teacher at this place. And yeah, and then I returned to Perth, and I managed to get to stay with someone for a short time. And eventually I moved back over to the eastern side of Australia and found a place to live. So let's expand out from that. For me, that was more vocational in that I've had to follow a rhythm which is perhaps not in alignment with society's career patterns. And it felt very important for me to follow this rhythm. Yeah, I'm feeling to talk about poverty. Isn't it interesting? Yeah, other ideas are coming up for me to speak first about. There was another occasion in Melbourne where I had been working for a council, and I actually did something funny at the council. It was just a small thing. I actually put up signs on the windows, and it was hi people. I was saying hello to the other building. I called it Windows SMS, and I did it for fun. You know, having been a clown, you know, it's very hard for me now to work in a corporate environment because I have a sense of humour, and I don't think it'll go down well. I'm sure they'll think it unprofessional, but I actually thought it was hilarious, and my boss didn't really like it. I do know that, but you know, it wasn't something she'd ever sacked me over. But I found myself wanting to leave. It wasn't working out for me there. Obviously a square peg in a round hole, didn't really fit. So I left, but I didn't have enough money, and I couldn't get onto welfare for 8 weeks. So I was actually without money for 8 weeks, and I was in a situation where I had to leave the place I was in because I couldn't pay rent. Now, at that time, I was getting very low on money. I can remember walking around the area that I was living, and I think I had $5 in my pocket. And I have talked about this on one of my other videos before. And I just remember noticing my shoes. You know, I thought they need changing. They're not very in good condition. So I walked along the street, and to my surprise, I saw a clothing bin, and there was the exact shoes sitting outside that clothing bin. I stepped out of my shoes and into these shoes, and it was a perfect fit. And I laughed. I walked on. I was thinking, I need a loaf of bread. I walked on, and to my amazement, there was a loaf of bread actually sitting on top of a fence. So I went and knocked on the door of the house and asked the person if I could take this bread and blow me down. She said yes, and I had some bread. So anyway, what ended up happening is I had a little bit of extra money for coffee, and I could, you know, go to the shops and have a coffee. I also do have recollections as well as moving through a shopping centre, you know, through a supermarket, and having very little money and having to buy noodles. And there was another point at which I remember having more money and I could go down the aisle with things that were more expensive and feeling joy in that. But what I learned was not, not that I was so much deficient, but it was more of an appreciation of things was what I actually felt, because I'd been, in a sense, not able to access good quality food, through my travelling too, where I've literally lived without a home for quite a while. There was great gratitude around even having accommodation that was warm and, to be able to sleep on a bed, not the ground, and having a jug, to boil water. So what these things brought me, rather than this sense of poor me, it actually made me a humbler person, and gratitude was there. I felt deeply grateful. I lived very deeply as a result of not having these things that are instant access at our fingertips in society. We can get these things very easily. So I learnt gratitude. I also learnt to trust what I call the universe. You let life guide you. You have to listen internally. If you've got no supporters, you've got no one out there you can access for money, and I don't have a wealthy family, and I didn't want to ask my friends to assist me, you have to trust. There was a point where I went without money for 3 months, so I went off welfare, and it was part of my work in peace to test whether my life is supported or not, because this is part of the big issue with homelessness. If you feel life is very limited and you feel this poverty, this really deep sense of I have no power over my reality, then you're really going to live in a deficit type mentality. What I've tried to cultivate is an abundance type mentality, that there's always enough, that life will bring to me what I'm needing. And I did test this. Funnily enough, when I tested it, I was house sitting. So that's another way to get accommodation for those of you listening to this who don't have accommodation at the moment. You can house sit. I remember going off all money, and people rang me out of the blue and offered me work as a clown to work with children. I'm just going to put that up a bit. I notice that's dropped down. So they offered me work as a clown. I never advertised, but it came to me, and I was able to get some food, and I actually got paid quite well, to my amazement. Now, others could say, well, why didn't you just go off and be a clown and make money out of that? My inner feeling was not to start the business. It was to offer service. So what I would say there from a philosophical, and if I'm being true to myself, I don't actually want to earn money. I like money, like I'm not against it, but it's not my motivation. I actually want to serve people. And funnily enough, when I've clowned on the streets, when I have travelled a lot and I've clowned for free a lot, the joy for me was in giving it for free. It wasn't about, taking from society. It was about gifting society. But what I really loved when I did that was that people would actually give me coffee or give me food as a clown. And I know what that was. It was the sense of love. They felt love for me doing this. I made them happy. And so they gave to me. And I'll give you another example of someone gifting me. So again, for anyone homeless watching this, it's about giving to the society around you. So don't just sit there with your cup. I know that's a tried and true tradition in the begging area. But when you beg, you're actually sending out an energy of not enough. And you're wanting people to feel sorry for you, so they'll put money in your cup. I'm not doubting for a sec there are desperate people out there who really need the money. But I also know that many are on drugs. Others are just sort of doing it for the money. just as someone would who was working. But what I've learned is, and it was quite natural, the more you give, the more you get. And that giving can be a smile. So when someone's walking past you, just smile at them and say, hi, how are you? I noticed people who were selling the big issue do that, and that's a great thing. They're connecting with their community because it's love actually that will give to you. Or some might think, they feel for you, and that's a great thing too. They're showing their compassion. But I've found that the more I give, the more that comes my way. And that's because we're already connected to one another. So you have to move out of a poverty mentality and into an abundance mentality, which says there's enough. There's always enough. I always had a tent with me, so I never felt homeless, and I always said that. I made the statement, I'm not homeless. I actually have a tent. And what that sent out to life, if you like, is I will never be without a home. And as a consequence of that powerful thought, because it's our thoughts that land us wherever we go, I was never without a place to stay. And even when I camped, I was in a state of great joy. I felt very free. And I felt very proud of myself for surviving and thriving, interestingly enough, and being able to live with just enough. You start to think about possessions, how much stuff we have, and really not connecting to the natural world of life, which unfolds in its own way. So when life becomes this mystery, every day you don't know where you're going, you don't know what's next. It can be both an exciting place. It can be daunting at times too, where you just sort of wish you could have a home. You could just go home and meet your partner and have dinner and watch TV and things like that. But I guess I've chosen the life I've chosen, which is to explore those boundaries, and chosen a life to dedicate myself to inner peace and outer peace, because I feel that's what's needed in the world today. It's more important than me making money. And while some say that if you're on welfare, you're taking from the system, that's not true. People pay GST, they're definitely contributing. Life is not necessarily an economic system. Well, it's not an economic system. We human beings have created an economic system to create a form of security. It's the Protestant work ethic we've created, which says you should work and only good people work. And there we have this very strong prejudice arising of, if you don't have a job, you must be a loser. There's very strong, oh my goodness, I've seen it many times. I've seen the attitudes and the judgments of those who I wouldn't have thought would have been judgmental, who are in charities or giving service to the world. I've seen these economic attitudes very strong. I've seen it in my own family, who have looked upon my choices as a losing game, not a winning game, because I've got what some might term nothing to show for it. And yet, if you were to ask me what I actually think about the life I've lived, it's been the most extraordinary life. And what have I learned? I've learned inner security. I've learned to trust stepping outside that boundary. I've learned that life is intelligent and that I have felt supported in this life. I am open to the possibilities, and that's how it's reflected for me. I have a very positive mind, and I want to work for society for free, which I have done for 18 years now. I've met with the obligations of welfare when I've needed to, but on the whole, my whole desire is to work selflessly for a society that I dearly love, and I want to live in a state of love. I don't want to serve a system that I feel is destroying the planet. And I'm a trained economist myself, and I can see what economics does. And whilst I can also see how many amazing things it's created in terms of, through demand and supply, we've built houses and roads and infrastructure. We've invested in technologies. The world has become smaller as a result of, IT technology. We've got satellites. We've got, spaceships that we send up to the moon. We have amazing technologies that we've created through the economic system. So I'm only saying that because I'm not begrudging that system. I believe it's a step on the path of self-realization as well, because we need to see how it functions, by setting a price, by paying people wages. What do they do? Is this what they want? The whole premise, of course, with economics is that the system essentially is designed, or was designed, to actually support society. So through setting prices on products and services, through employees getting paid wages, which is a cost of production in the system, this sets up a system of exchanges. So we've been exchanging money between each other. And of course, the roots of that was barter system. We had agriculture. We used to exchange some cultures through shells in the beginning. Some exchanged, you give me something, I give you something back. You saw that with the American Indian culture, always very much gifting each other. And of course, we had small markets where craftspeople would create things and others would come and they would either give gold initially or some sort of basic coinage when this economic system first started. And then eventually it became moneyed. And then those monies were bound by nation state. So we had our own currencies. Then as trading organisations developed, trading routes opened up around the world. People were exchanging their goods for money, which was to buy food, and then eventually shelter and accommodation and trinkets and whatever we think we needed. And that became the basis of these economic exchanges. But where the system fell down was, those who were motivated to make that money, or perhaps lucky enough to invent some sort of product or service that people wanted and needed, they were able to make more money. And then status was born. And with that, attitudes of superiority flourished. We had the haves and the have-nots. And then there were social attitudes of you must be deficient in some ways. If you're poor, you're uneducated, you're not worth as much, your humanity is devalued. We don't care about you arose. And so rather than being loved and appreciated for who you really are and honoured in what choices you make in your life, regardless of where that has left you. Some of the amazing mystics in the past used to walk around naked with a begging bowl, and they chose to just give love. There's been lots of ways to live this life, and it's not all about money. In fact, the majority of what's happening in our world is not about money. It's actually families and friends and smiles, and we cohabitate in cities, we catch public transport, we're rubbing shoulders in lots of ways. Yet the money system is defining what gets built, what doesn't, where money gets flowed into, what's of value, what's not. And thus far we've pretty much valued materialism, and that then becomes an extension of our ego, where I can say, well, I've got this and you haven't, and I feel special. Or, this particular product, is of a very high quality that you can't access, or have exclusivity, which means I'm better than you. They send silent signals. I was trained in marketing. I know about branding and why we brand and how we sell it. But a car, it's just backing up to my car right now. Don't you dare touch me. And see, from my perspective, I can't afford to fix the car. His insurance would have to. But if it did hit, I suppose I would laugh. What can I do? So anyway, that discussion then was about materialism, which is what money has generated. To have all these lovely, comfortable, wonderful things, and I can understand the attraction. But there's also another part of life, which is the mystery of life, the excitement of that, you know, not knowing what's going to happen next. There's a great vitality in living on the edge of this life. And I guess for me, I like the challenge, you know. So that's what I've done. Yeah, so it's been interesting. So going back again to looking at poverty and homelessness, where maybe mental illness is involved, or it could be the economic structure is contracting due to global economic conditions. We've seen around the planet today the energy industry is definitely contracting. And from an economics perspective, that's definitely a sign of constriction or contraction in business. So businesses are not making the sales they were making before, because the energy is very much fueling industry. That's how industry keeps going. So global economic conditions contracting. Environmental impacts are happening. The ice is melting up in the Himalayas and Antarctica and the Arctic. That means the temperature of the planet is definitely oscillating. I think everybody knows today that there's major changes afoot, and there is. The world as we know it is changing. The issue of homelessness I saw in the United States when I was in San Diego, that people were living in tents in car parks, you know, and they were coming to San Diego because it was winter. They had to travel south from the northern states where there was a lot of snow. That fascinated me. When I was in Hawaii, you know, which you would never imagine homelessness, I saw tents there as well, around squares, and I thought the Americans are not very wealthy. Of course, today's Independence Day. The whole point, you know, of this independence was self-determination, was life, liberty, and happiness. You know, being an independent and sovereign state. But the capitalist system has not looked after the welfare of the people itself. What's happened is, as we've become absolutely addicted to money and transfixed by materialism, what we've done is we've disconnected the heart from the head. We don't feel so much. As people became distracted by these things, they were not giving their children the love that they needed. Women went off to work, and this is certainly not a statement about women in the sense of them not being good mothers. I'm sure they're lovely with their children, but the economic demands for them to work have pulled them away from children. Children have gone into daycare. And because women are trying to sort of catch up to men because they've been seen as less, you know, there's a whole heap of dynamics around the empowerment of women, you know, who are still being paid 80% of the male wage. I mean, it's incredible for the same work. So women have kind of had no choice but to really, you know, take on careers with children, and some of them are doing it alone without partners. Many of them actually, I think, are without partners, because the whole defining role of male has changed. You know, they're no longer the breadwinners, so men have had to adapt and adjust to their changing status as women become employers, and women excel in various sports and become commentators and start to input into the society. But as a result of that, we've got generations of children who are just not having a parent around them to really guide and help them. So we're seeing kids becoming detached from the system itself and emotionally detached. They're locking themselves into technology. They're soothing themselves by plugging in. And it's, in a way, it's escaping. And it might be because the parents aren't there. They're trying to keep themselves occupied. But it has real challenges for the neural networks of the brain. It's going to change. And also the way that they socialise is changing. They're not good at it. They're more shy, and they might have more anxiety, and they may find themselves in a situation where they can't get motivated to get work. They stay at home and then they're constantly put down because they're just not working. Parents are feeling overwhelmed because they're working too hard. They want to retire and they can't. Huge pressures coming to bear on lots of people. Housing market prices going through the roof. Ordinary people can't even buy a house anymore. In terms of the rental market, you know, certainly in Australia we've got Airbnb, so rooms that might have been available to rent are now being rented per night by $100 a night, where it was usually $100 a week. And then we've got trying to rent a house, you know, in the cities, you're looking at anything up to, you know, for one bedroom can be $200 a week in Australia. And if you're on, say, welfare, that's 660, let's say. That's 400 out of 660, you know. $260, you've got to try and put fuel in your car, feed yourself, any extra costs that you've got, insurance, whatever, transport, clothing, it's got to come out of that 130 per week, which is not much. Although it's better than countries that don't have a welfare system at all. But they typically have stronger communities, that's what happens. So they get looked after in that way. But they do struggle and people do starve, that's for sure. So yes, it's not easy. The society's become very complicated, and of course you can end up homeless very easily by not being able to pay rent. And if your family aren't supportive, and we're seeing that, so a lot of social disintegration. If you don't have a partner, you're paying double to try and survive. So we're living in a very complicated world. So I just want to say to people who've made judgments about homeless people, I would say err on the side of compassion. Don't sit in judgment. They're not less than you. They're having a different life experience to you. And you don't know where they've come from, but had you sat down perhaps and talked to them, if they're on the street, you might find a really interesting story unfolds. I've sat with many homeless people and found that they've got parental breakups or family members have died. They actually literally don't have anyone. Or I met a guy in Ireland who'd lost everything through the financial crisis. He had 6 children and none of them saw him, and he was living off the street. I offered to write an article for him to try and give him some publicity. So, you know, there's real challenges that people face. Some have mental health issues. They can't hold a job. They can't do the compliance thing with the welfare agency. The job agencies aren't particularly effective. Particularly, even when you've got skills, they're not that effective. You know, we have to become more innovative in actually creating social entrepreneurship. And rather than penalising people and fining them for not complying, which is a policing type mentality, which is only going to force people off welfare and into poverty, into deeper homelessness, what you need to do is really find out what people want to do and try and move them in the direction of their dreams. They're more likely to study, and I think the universities could open up sort of aspects of their student pricing regime, which is free for those who are homeless or unemployed. Why not? You know, give people an opportunity. There's brilliant people everywhere, and just imagine you help someone to empower themselves, you're going to empower the whole society. Unfortunately, with the money system, we tend to just look at self-interest. We don't look at community interests anymore. You know, economics is not a social policy necessarily, even though they talk about it. Yes, they do invest in hospitals and education and, you know, welfare. But we still have as a basis a very strong paradigm of self-interest and greed. And you're in it for yourself. You're not really helping other people. We've lost that connection with really our community and families. And I believe that's the greatest loss to the country. I don't think GDP really reflects the true wealth of a nation. It's actually in the quality of its people, the values in which they express, and whether they're willing to assist each other in need. That says a lot about the character of someone. If they ignore them, keep walking past, saying it's not me, it's not my problem, they're living in a very disconnected, separated state of consciousness. You know, I think we have to turn the whole paradigm of this upside down, and what you give to another, you give to yourself. Let's look at gross national happiness. Let's do work that makes us happy. Let's look at social benefit as a motivator for formulating new ways of doing things. I'm very much interested in Richard Branson's approach to, decentralization and delegation that he has in workplaces, choosing your own holidays, empowering people to have more say. I like the idea of collectivization in workplaces. It's not socialism. It's just, if you're going to be working in a workplace, I've worked in 400. I can't see why you shouldn't have a part of that profit making. It'll make you feel more interested in what's going on and really work as a team and a family in that organisation. I'm not for the power at the top who make exorbitant amounts of money and the trickle down to workers and the incredible hours that they have to work. This is not an incentive for a happy life. Many of them feel trapped. They're depressed. They're taking antidepressants. I'm sitting here. You can see people have been running and walking past. They're all trying to get exercise because they're sat all day. That's not a healthy life. Why can't we work at part-time for 3/4 of the full-time wage? Then you're going to get full employment. You'll get families staying together because they're spending time together. Everyone's getting, access to productive and positive work, where we have workplaces that are based on well-being, not bullying, not control from the top down. When there's conflict, people come straight in and resolve it. They don't just ignore it or promote the person creating the problems. We don't have this sort of policing control mindset, which I think is very destructive to a well-functioning society. We need to develop compassion and really emotional intelligence, where it's not only the logic, analytical side that we develop. This is the mind identification, which disconnects from the heart, seeing it as a weakness. It's not. We have to create social intelligence. Daniel Goleman talks about that if you want to check him out on the net. Social intelligence, emotional intelligence, where we think and feel our reality, and then we look upon the world and we create the changes that are needed. I wrote Real Hope, which is an acronym for responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment. There's an S on the end, Real Hope's service. When values become the basis of who we become, you will find that what we create will reflect values, not the need for money. A person who goes to accountancy doesn't necessarily want to be an accountant. They're wanting the money. Those who go into law are the same. They may well, I've met many lawyers actually who've been clowns, interestingly enough, really clowns. They've worked as clowns. And musicians, a lot of artists went into these professions because they can make money out of it. They can pay their mortgage. We don't want people directed into areas just because they want the money. We want them directed into areas that is reflective of their talent. Can you imagine what's going to come out of a society when we create less working hours, we make it talent-based work, we make it gross national happiness as the focus, so you do what makes you happy. We get a universal basic wage. Now that one I love, and in fact an ACT politician told me that they're working on it, which is a universal basic wage for everyone. So there goes your welfare. Welfare goes, but everyone gets the basic income, which covers food, rent, and other additional things. Now what that means is we're on a level playing field. There's no longer dole bludgers, no longer welfare this and that, and they're all complaining. We're actually all getting it. So then your basics are met. You can start to focus on what you love. Now, when people are happy, they're not going to be so violent. You're going to see a de-escalation in domestic violence. You're going to see people actually following their passions, getting educated. We make sure that we teach conflict resolution in the schools and in the homes. And if we're talking democracy, well, why don't we actually create a real democracy in the home, where children are actually consulted about changes that are being made, so they learn democracy very young. In the kindergartens, we need to go in there with the peace education, create changes there. Primary school, values-based education, anti-bullying, and learning how to collaborate and not control others. To remove all these heroes that were controllers who were cruel or harming of other people. We want to create new role models that are inspiring and gentle and kind and brave, who have gone out into the world and really pioneered philosophically, climbed mountains, you know, gone and helped communities, these wonderful human beings who pop out of nowhere and actually go and help other people. That's what we want. We want really rounded, helpful, kind people in this world. And that's the world I'm hoping to co-create with my life. So yes, I'm moving into homelessness now at this moment. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I'm not scared. I'm just going to hit the road and see what happens and trust life. I've done it before and I'll do it again, and hopefully develop my work, which is to teach peace, non-violence and anti-bullying. Anyone who wants to look at my website, www.worldpeacefull.com. Anyone who wants workshops on workplace bullying, go to http://biz.worldpeacefull.com. That's peaceful is with a double L. So at this point, I don't have any income, but if anybody would like to utilise my skills and talents to further this beautiful vision of gross national happiness and empowerment through developing inner and outer peace, I'm still working on peace within me. That's why I keep practicing every day. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm definitely dedicated to it. And my wish is for a world that is seeing itself in the other. There is no judgment in this new world. There is only peace, love, and infinite opportunity. Thank you. You have a wonderful, wonderful night or day wherever you are. Much love. Bye.